The stories presented in this video are real, but we have changed the characters' names and altered images to protect their identities. The creator of this video is not an investigative officer. These narratives have been sourced from various internet platforms. Our intent is not to accuse or target anyone in particular. Thank you for understanding.
The discovery of a horrific murder on the evening of April 3, 2008, rocked the quiet Nashville suburb. What appeared to be a picture-perfect housewife's life took a dark turn, culminating in a violent affair. Layers of deceit, treachery, and a fatal obsession that split a family apart would be revealed by the probe. In her neighborhood, Elena Rodriguez had long been regarded as the ideal housewife. She and her husband, Miguel Rodriguez, a diligent construction foreman, had 2 kids at the age of 34. Their modest yet cozy home was located in a peaceful Nashville, Tennessee suburb. Elena's generosity and commitment to her family won her admiration. Her life appeared to be perfect on the surface: a comfortable home, 2 lovely children, and a devoted husband. However, like many seemingly flawless stories, there were sinister secrets concealed beneath the surface. Elena and Miguel, 36, had been together for more than 10 years. He was a quiet man who was devoted to his family and his job. He was frequently gone from home due to his long hours on building sites, but he felt that it was all worthwhile to give his family a nice life. Miguel took pride in the secure home, solid income, and apparently contented marriage he had created. Victoria, Elena's cousin, had always been close to her. The 2 ladies shared everything from teenage fantasies to childhood secrets as they grew up together, almost like sisters. Victoria wed David Cortez, a prosperous real estate broker who was renowned for his attractiveness and charisma. Attending neighborhood activities and family get-togethers, the 2 spouses frequently spent time together. However, Elena underwent a transformation over time. She felt an emptiness rising inside of her even though she had everything she had ever desired. Miguel frequently left before morning and returned long after nightfall because he was constantly working. Elena started to feel more and more alone because of his excellent commitment to his work, which left little time for her. The passion that previously characterized their marriage had all but vanished, and their conversations had become short and largely focused on the kids or domestic issues. Victoria's husband, David Cortez, started to show increasing interest in Elena during this period. Charming, perceptive, and always prepared with a praise or a seductive smile, he was everything Miguel wasn't. Although David was known to be a bit of a ladies' man, Elena had always dismissed his actions as innocuous. But Elena found herself lured to David's charisma as Miguel started to disappear more. It began rather casually. David's comments would make Elena giggle at family get-togethers, or they would engage in lengthy chats while Victoria was occupied with the kids. Elena hadn't experienced Miguel's sincere interest in her feelings and thoughts in years. Their bond became stronger the more time they spent together. Over time, what started out as lighthearted banter became into something more, something dangerous. Elena and David had started a serious relationship by the end of 2007. They took care to ensure that no one would suspect anything by meeting in secret whenever possible. They had a passionate relationship that was full of the thrill of being caught and the exhilaration of stolen moments. Elena felt loved, wanted, and alive for the first time in years. On April 3, 2008, everything fell apart when Miguel, Elena Rodriguez's husband, discovered her dead in her house after returning from work earlier than normal. She had been stabbed once in the chest, and her body was found in the kitchen, lying in a pool of blood. Miguel dialed 911 right away, his voice panicked as he struggled to process the horror he was witnessing. Early the following morning, the Nashville Police Department showed up at the Rodriguez home. The investigation was assigned to Detective Juan Garcia, who is renowned for his meticulous investigative techniques. After a thorough examination of the crime scene, it was determined that, despite the initial impression of a burglary gone wrong, Elena was specifically targeted and there was no evidence of forced entry. Interviews with neighbors revealed that none of them had heard or seen anything out of the ordinary. Detective Garcia started questioning Elena's closest relatives 2 days later, on April 6, 2008, beginning with her husband, Miguel. Miguel sat beside Garcia in the police station's tiny dark interview room. His eyes were red from sobbing for days and his face was a mask of sorrow. He insisted that he had no enemies and that he couldn't fathom who would wish to harm Elena, showing that he was truly distraught by his wife's passing. Miguel acknowledged that their relationship hadn't always been ideal when questioned about it. In recent months, Elena had appeared aloof, but he had put it down to the strain of running the home and raising their kids while he put in long hours at work. Miguel was questioned by Garcia regarding his whereabouts on the day of the murder. Miguel clarified that when he found Elena's death, he had been at work all day, leaving early in the morning and coming home at around 5 o'clock. He gave his co-worker's name so they could verify his alibi. Miguel had been on the job site since 7 a.m., according to Garcia's follow-up with Miguel's boss and co-workers, until around 5 p.m. Now that Miguel's alibi was firmly established, Garcia had to search elsewhere for information. Detective Garcia then focused on Victoria, Elena's cousin, and David Cortez, her husband. The couple sat together on their living room sofa, with their hands gripped securely during the interview, which was conducted inside the Cortez residence. As she talked about her connection with Elena, Victoria's voice was cracking, and she was clearly shaken. She talked about how they had been closer than cousins, more like sisters. However, Victoria had observed a shift in Elena throughout the past few months. She appeared to be carrying a burden that she would not disclose, and she had grown more reclusive and less talkative. Victoria had never asked Elena for specifics, but she had assumed it was due to marital issues. On the other side, David Cortez seemed more calm. He said that he was shocked by Elena's passing and that he could not fathom who would do such a thing. David stated that he had spent the majority of the day at a business conference when questioned about his whereabouts on the day of the murder. He gave the names of those who could attest to him, as well as the specifics of the meeting. Detective Garcia observed David's composure during the interrogation. Garcia found it a little odd that David appeared to be in control of his emotions in contrast to Victoria, who was obviously upset. Garcia felt that there was more to the story than what had been made public as he concluded the interviews. David's composure in the face of such a catastrophe was unnerving, and Victoria's description of Elena's previous behavior suggested deeper problems. Garcia was aware that he needed to learn more. As the inquiry proceeded, he gave his staff instructions to confirm David's alibi and to closely monitor him and Miguel. Detective Garcia and his crew put in a lot of effort as the inquiry went on to figure together what happened before Elena Rodriguez died. Their efforts started to pay off on April 8, 2008, when they discovered a big lead. Garcia came across a slew of unusual text messages while doing a routine review of Elena's phone logs. Using a contact saved under a pseudonym, the flirty and intimate texts were sent and received. Garcia was instantly alarmed by this revelation because he believed that these texts might be essential to comprehending what had transpired. The texts exposed a side of Elena that no one had previously known, a passionate, private relationship that had been meticulously concealed from her cousin Victoria and her husband Miguel. In the hopes of finding more information, Garcia gave his team instructions to track down the phone linked to the pseudonym. Victoria's husband, David Cortez, was connected to the phone when the trace returned. Garcia was astonished to learn that Elena had been having an affair with her own cousin's husband for almost a year. The situation had been handled very carefully. Elena and David only met in locations where they were unlikely to be seen together, and they mostly communicated via these coded communications. Although their connection had given Elena the love and care she so desperately needed, it had also put her in danger. Their affair was a ticking time bomb that might devastate both families, because Elena was married to Miguel and David was married to Victoria. On April 10, 2008, 2 days later, David Cortez was returned for interrogation. Detective Garcia took a different approach to the questioning this time. Garcia was resolved to pressure David into disclosing additional information after obtaining proof of the affair. David remained cool and collected during the interview, but Garcia quickly confronted him about the text messages. At first, David denied any misconduct, saying the communications were innocuous and had nothing more to them. But as Garcia asked him for further information, David's calmness started to waver. David eventually confessed to the affair under duress, once the evidence became too strong to deny. Although he acknowledged that their connection had been passionate and intense, he maintained that it was only a passing affair. David asserted that he had broken up with Elena only weeks before she passed away, and that he had never planned to leave Victoria. According to him, the situation was now behind them, but he presented it as an error that had gone too far. Garcia focused on Victoria after learning this new information. Victoria sobbed when questioned about it. She said that she had always suspected David of adultery, but she had never thought her own cousin might be involved. Victoria disclosed that although she had observed behavioral shifts in David, his frequent absences, and his cryptic phone conversations, she had never faced him head-on. Victoria had been suspicious, but she had trusted David's assurances until Garcia told her the truth. She was heartbroken by the revelation, but she didn't have any more proof that David was personally responsible for Elena's death. Although their connection had given Elena the love and care she so desperately needed, it had also put her in danger. Their affair was a ticking time bomb that might devastate both families, because Elena was married to Miguel and David was married to Victoria. On April 10, 2008, 2 days later, David Cortez was returned for interrogation. Detective Garcia took a different approach to the questioning this time. Garcia was resolved to pressure David into disclosing additional information after obtaining proof of the affair. David remained cool and collected during the interview, but Garcia quickly confronted him about the text messages. At first, David denied any misconduct, saying the communications were innocuous and had nothing more to them. But as Garcia asked him for further information, David's calmness started to waver. David eventually confessed to the affair under duress, once the evidence became too strong to deny. Although he acknowledged that their connection had been passionate and intense, he maintained that it was only a passing affair. David asserted that he had broken up with Elena only weeks before she passed away, and that he had never planned to leave Victoria. According to him, the situation was now behind them, but he presented it as an error that had gone too far. Garcia focused on Victoria after learning this new information. Victoria sobbed when questioned about it. She said that she had always suspected David of adultery, but she had never thought her own cousin might be involved. Victoria disclosed that although she had observed behavioral shifts in David, his frequent absences, and his cryptic phone conversations, she had never faced him head-on. Victoria had been suspicious, but she had trusted David's assurances until Garcia told her the truth. She was heartbroken by the revelation, but she didn't have any more proof that David was personally responsible for Elena's death. The treachery rocked her world, although she didn't know as much about the murder as the detectives did. Although everyone knew the truth, David remained steadfast in his denial that he was involved in the murder. Elena and David had arranged to meet on the morning of April 3, 2008, when Miguel left for work as normal, not realizing that his entire life was about to fall apart. Elena sent the kids to school, anticipating David's arrival, after David informed Victoria that he had an appointment with a customer. She ensured that the house was immaculate, that she looked flawless, and that everything was in order for their meeting. Around midday, David reached the Rodriguez residence. They were soon in each other's arms when Elena greeted him at the door. However, when they were making love, something happened. Everything changed when Elena groaned her husband's name, since it spoilt the atmosphere and made her feel guilty all of a sudden. She was obviously still in love with her spouse. She asked herself, what was she even doing? Neither of them could exactly place the sense of urgency or anxiety that pervaded the air. Their typical passion had a darker undertone, either due to growing remorse or a growing fear of being found out. They had a little argument. David claimed that they could continue as long as they were cautious, but Elena was uncomfortable and wanted to quit their affair since she was growing more and more nervous about it being revealed. The strain of their secret, along with feelings of frustration and jealousy, caused the argument to quickly spiral out of control. If he didn't agree to leave her alone, Elena threatened to notify his cousin's wife. David snatched a knife off the kitchen counter in a fit of wild wrath. The following few moments were a haze. The knife dropped from David's grasp, and before they knew it, Elena was on the ground with blood splattering around her. David grabbed the knife and ran from the scene in panic. Too scared to think clearly, he didn't bother to wipe it down. Realizing what he had done, his mind racing, he raced to his car. The lady he claimed to love, Elena, was now dead, her life drained from her body, lying in her own kitchen. Let's get back to the case. The probe gained a fresh sense of urgency after these disclosures. In order to connect David Cortez to the murder, Detective Garcia and his crew set out to collect additional evidence. They achieved a breakthrough on April 12, 2008. After reviewing surveillance footage from a store close to the Rodriguez residence, it was discovered that David Cortez was present on the day of the murder. David had previously claimed to have been at a business meeting at the time, but the video disproved that claim. Garcia's alibi was disproved when he looked into it more and found that the meeting David claimed to be at had been canceled. A partial fingerprint on the Rodriguez home's back door was discovered by forensic investigators examining the crime scene, in addition to the CCTV film. When asked why the fingerprint was identified as belonging to him, David said it must have been left there during a prior visit to the house. Given the mounting body of evidence against David, Garcia was dubious of this argument. Detective Garcia collected enough evidence by April 15, 2008, to proceed. A damning picture was created by the surveillance film, the fingerprint, the disintegration of David's alibi, and the motivation shown by the affair. Garcia secured an arrest warrant for David Cortez. David was arrested without incident that afternoon and accused of killing Elena Rodriguez. The entire neighborhood, including the families, was terrified by the arrest. After being meticulously concealed for almost a year, the affair was finally revealed with disastrous results. In addition to taking Elena's life, David's actions had ruined his own marriage and broken the trust between two families. The truth of what he had done started to set in as David sat in his cell awaiting trial. A path of devastation was left in its wake as what had begun as a covert affair turned into a fatal clash. The prosecution developed a strong case against David Cortez as the case got ready for trial. They portrayed him as a man who chose murder to keep his secrets safe because he was unable to cope with the stress of leading two lives. However, the defense contended that there was no hard evidence linking David to Elena's death, and that he might have been set up by someone else who knew about the romance. The start of David Cortez's trial on May 5, 2008, garnered a lot of media and public attention. Everyone in the courtroom was excited to watch the case progress. The trial became the talk of Nashville, Tennessee, with reporters lining the corridors. Without any delay, the prosecution presented their evidence against David. They provided a thorough chronology of the events, backed up by an abundance of proof. A crucial component of the prosecution's case was the text messages sent between Elena and David, which amply demonstrated the affair and the growing hostility between the two. The connection depicted in these communications had grown more erratic in the weeks preceding Elena's passing. Next, surveillance footage was played, showing David on the day of the murder, close to the Rodriguez residence. David's assertion that he had attended a business meeting, which the prosecution noted had been canceled, was clearly refuted by this evidence. David's veracity was seriously called into question because the video showed him at the site when he claimed to be somewhere else. Additionally, the prosecution produced forensic evidence, such as the partial fingerprint discovered on the Rodriguez home's back door. David was at the location in a manner that could not be explained away as a prior visit, because his fingerprint matched David's. This tangible proof was essential in establishing David's direct involvement in the crime. Testimonies from witnesses regarding the two couples' failing relationships were called. Friends and neighbors talked about how David's behavior had changed, becoming more reclusive and secretive, and how Elena and Miguel had become estranged. These statements contributed to the development of a motive by implying that David was under tremendous pressure as his affair with Elena started to fall apart. One of the most moving parts of the trial was Miguel Rodriguez's testimony, With a voice laden with sorrow and incredulity, he described the day he discovered his wife's body. He talked about how he was shocked to learn of her affair with David, in addition to her passing. Miguel's testimony reminded everyone of the true human cost of the crime, and gave the case a poignant and personal dimension. Additionally, Victoria Cortez testified. She testified with a mixture of grief and betrayal. She explained that although she had always trusted David, in the months preceding Elena's passing she had begun to fear something was amiss. Victoria talked about how she confronted David following his detention and discovered the full scope of his deception. She described how his dishonesty had caused their once strong marriage to fall apart. As Victoria described how David's actions had destroyed their lives, her anguish was evident. The prosecution maintained throughout the trial that David Cortez had acted in a desperate manner. When Elena threatened to reveal their affair and ruin his marriage, David decided to forever silence her. A guy who had been driven to the brink and made the fatal choice to keep his secrets was depicted by the physical and testimonies of the evidence. Aware that they were making a decision on the destiny of a man who had split two families apart, the jury listened carefully as the trial went on. The case against David was solid, and the evidence was overwhelming. Knowing that the verdict in this trial would have long-term effects on all parties, the community watched and waited. The jury rendered a decision following weeks of testimony. Second-degree murder was the verdict for David Cortez. Despite some circumstantial evidence, the jury was persuaded of his guilt by the strength of the evidence. He received a sentence of 25 years in prison with the chance of release after 15 years. Victoria left the life they had created together when she filed for divorce from David following the trial. In an attempt to move on from the unpleasant memories, she left Nashville. Miguel Rodriguez remained in the house where the tragedy happened, a continual reminder of the life he had before, still in shock over the death of his wife and the treachery. The incidents left the previously lively and tight-knit neighborhood haunted. Long after the trial, rumors about the affair and murder persisted, serving as a warning about how quickly secrets may turn fatal. The terrible murder of Elena Rodriguez serves as a sobering reminder of the perils of dishonesty and the extent people will go to in order to keep their secrets. Ultimately, what was intended to be a covert passion turned into a fatal obsession. However, this example pales in comparison to the one in which the housewife dies as a result of her covert liaison with the neighbor's kid. Watch and subscribe for more of the never-ending family and neighborhood turmoil.
The stories presented in this video are real, but we have changed the characters' names and altered images to protect their identities. The creator of this video is not an investigative officer. These narratives have been sourced from various internet platforms. Our intent is not to accuse or target anyone in particular. Thank you for understanding.
Today we explore the horrific case of Maggie Caldwell, a wealthy individual who amassed her wealth through the purchase of upscale real estate. You will be deeply shaken by this case. Our narrative begins with Maggie Caldwell, a beautiful 54-year-old woman who amassed a fortune in upscale real estate. Some of the most prestigious homes in the nation were in her portfolio, and her name was associated with success. However, Maggie's path was everything but typical. With a keen mind and a strong sense of resolve, she navigated the complex world of wealth and power, never hesitating to seize what she desired in life or business. Then, there was 26-year-old Ethan Riley, a charming but tough individual whose life had taken a surprising turn. Before destiny brought him into Maggie's world, Ethan, a former collegiate athlete who had been disabled by injury, sailed through a number of ordinary jobs, his ambitions of success fading away. Their unique and passionate relationship appeared to bridge a void in their lives. Ethan appealed to Ethan's extravagant lifestyle, while Maggie saw in him a sense of youth and vitality. Maggie's lavish lifestyle served as the setting for their covert affair for almost a year. However, something negative was simmering beneath it all. Time was running out before a bloody night occurred, as the excitement that had once propelled their romance devolved into a dangerous obsession. What began as an exhilarating escape quickly evolved into something far more perilous, igniting a chain of events beyond either party's control that would eventually have disastrous results. With a keen sense of opportunity and unwavering resolve, Maggie started her journey to become a real estate tycoon. She transformed rundown buildings into coveted mansions, enhancing her riches and prestige with each accomplishment. She had deeper, more secret desires beneath her polished exterior, though. Her marriage to Michael Caldwell, a CIA agent who was frequently deployed, was less of a love affair and more of a strategic alliance. Maggie was now free to investigate her own wants without the prying gaze of society. When Maggie was looking for excitement outside of the professional world, Ethan came into her life. Their lives soon became entwined in ways neither of them had anticipated as what started out as a casual fling deepened. Secrets and falsehoods began to surface as their affair went on, leading them to a disastrous conclusion that would permanently harm their lives and reputations. Maggie Caldwell's ascent to prominence was characterized by her unwavering drive, keen intellect, and remarkable aptitude for navigating the complex real estate industry. Maggie Caldwell's life was going to be consumed by chaos, and the storm outside was only the beginning. There were secrets hidden behind her perfect veneer that may ruin everything she had worked so hard to achieve. The forces attempting to bring her down were as fierce as the storm. She was the only child of an industrious construction worker and a committed schoolteacher, and she was born in a humble area of Chicago. Maggie demonstrated a natural ability to charm and persuade even as a young girl. These traits would later prove to be her greatest assets in the cutthroat world of luxury real estate. When she was awarded a scholarship to study architecture at a prominent university, her journey really got underway. Maggie immediately made an impression due to her unwavering commitment as well as her academic prowess. She soon caught the attention of a prominent professor with strong ties to the real estate sector. Maggie cultivated a strategic mindset and improved her creative abilities under his tutelage, laying the groundwork for her future business. After graduating, Maggie worked for a prestigious real estate company, where she quickly rose to prominence. As she closed transactions that others thought were unattainable, her co-workers looked on in wonder and even envy. By her 40s, Maggie had established Caldwell Estates, a real estate conglomerate that catered solely to the wealthiest people on the planet and was known for its luxury and inventiveness. However, as Maggie's career flourished, her personal life's shadows deepened. Every business triumph concealed a more serious and perilous breakdown at home. Ethan's entrance will only exacerbate the fissures that were already visible in her idyllic life. Instead of being a romantic partnership, her marriage to high-ranking CIA agent Michael Caldwell was a strategic collaboration. Maggie was left to her own devices, living in a world of luxury and desire, as Michael was often gone on secret missions. Theirs was a marriage in name only, a partnership of convenience where each followed their own interests individually. Ethan Riley stood out from the other males who came across Maggie's path. Ethan was more than just a passing fad at age 26. He developed into a crucial component of Maggie's well-planned existence. She made him the perfect companion by lavishing him with luxury and relocating him to the guest house on her expansive estate. With his tough appearance and effortless charm, Ethan appeared like the ideal addition to Maggie's world of high-end clothing, fine dining, and exclusive parties. However, Ethan had a more sinister and perverse history than Maggie could have ever envisioned. Ethan had wandered through life before he met her, leaving a trail of unfulfilled promises and dubious situations in his wake. He had a girlfriend in a small town, and there was one particularly disturbing episode involving her. She abruptly vanished without a trace, despite the fact that he had told everyone about her and painted a picture of the ideal relationship. The community was ablaze with gossip as the days stretched into weeks, but nobody knew what had happened to her until her body was discovered in an odd position next to Ethan's house. Rumors of his involvement followed him everywhere he went, but the authorities never had enough proof to prosecute him. Sarah's body was found partially submerged in the murky, shallow waters below Ethan's house on a stormy night. Draped in the white dress she had worn the last time anyone saw her, her lifeless body appeared almost out of place in the bleak, rain-soaked surroundings. It was unclear what caused the death, There were no obvious indications of struggle or proof of foul play, but the manner in which she was discovered was unquestionably unsettling. Some others thought Ethan knew more than he disclosed, despite the town's residents whispering about a terrible accident. The suspicion hung over Ethan like a shadow, but the local police ended the inquiry since they couldn't prove anything. The memory of that night followed him, a spectral reminder of the truths he kept hidden deep inside. But he quickly left the town. From the beginning, Ethan Riley introduced Maggie to the specters of a hidden past that would eventually engulf them both. However, control is a perilous delusion, and Maggie was on the verge of losing it. The more Maggie attempted to shape Ethan to her will, the more his troubled history hung over their relationship, threatening to destroy everything she had worked so hard to create. Their connected pasts were headed for disaster. For Maggie, having Ethan in her life was more than simply an exciting experience. It was a risky power and manipulation game. She became more and more embroiled in his web of secrets and falsehoods as she attempted to exert control over him, but Maggie was no stranger to peril. She had, after all, made her fortune by outwitting everyone who stood in her way. But this time, the repercussions were more lethal and the stakes were higher. Maggie and Ethan's love flourished in the background for almost a year. At social gatherings where Ethan's youthful charm and fine looks attracted adoring looks, Maggie took joy in flaunting him. She enjoyed the jealous looks from young ladies who could only hope to have a friend like Ethan. Ethan received the taste and financial stability of a life he had never experienced in exchange. However, the dynamic started to change as their bond grew. Ethan had never expected Maggie to be attracted to other young men. Even though he first agreed to their arrangement, he began to feel uneasy about Maggie's relationships with other men. Maggie's affair with Justin McAllister, a 28-year-old tennis instructor who frequently visited the same upscale club where Maggie spent her afternoons, marked a turning point in their relationship. Justin was shy, reserved, and totally oblivious to Maggie's secret life, everything that Ethan was not. He never suspected that she was a woman with a darker side. He only regarded her as a wealthy client who occasionally flirted with him. Justin was merely another victory for Maggie, a fleeting pleasure in her ravenous desire for younger men. However, it was a betrayal to Ethan. Despite the fact that their arrangement had always been transactional, Ethan began to feel possessive. The idea of Maggie with another man made him feel extremely uncomfortable because he had grown to love her. He started to wonder if he was merely another item in her collection, and started to wonder what their connection was all about. His fascination and jealousy increased as he gave it more thought. At first, Maggie, who was always a skilled manipulator, thought Ethan's possessiveness was admirable. Knowing that she could push him to the limit with a few words or a look gave her a sense of power and attention that she relished. But as Ethan started acting strangely, Maggie started to see that she had made a monster. Ethan began to follow Maggie, asking her whereabouts and checking her phone. Maggie, who was not used to being questioned, found herself losing control of the situation as his jealousy became overwhelming. Maggie lost control and experienced true fear for the first time. She was now the target of what had started out as a game, but had now become a lethal trap. The storm inside Maggie's house was even worse than the one outside. Ethan's jealousy erupted that night as the wind shrieked, beginning a fatal spiral that would end their lives together. Like many evenings, it had started with a sumptuous supper and excellent wine. However, Ethan's attitude altered as the evening went on. He grew more and more agitated. He was more pushy and pointed in his questioning regarding her previous relationships. Maggie, whose patience had run its course, answered with icy indifference, brushing off Ethan's worries as unfounded jealously. She was tired of Ethan's incessant need for assurance, and she had never meant for their relationship to get so convoluted. Their agreement was obvious to her. He offered her the companionship she so desperately needed, and she provided for him. Ethan, however, was no longer content with that. He kept wanting more of her time, more love, more attention. Ethan accused Maggie of betraying him as the dispute heated up. He addressed her in her private study, a soundproof space where she frequently withdrew to escape the outside world, and his voice trembled with emotion. Maggie mocked him for believing he could ever be more than a plaything in her life and laughed at his charges, her cold demeanor finally melting. The last straw was the insult. Ethan snatched up the shotgun Maggie kept for protection and pointed it at her in a blind rage. When Maggie understood how dangerous she was, her cold calm momentarily wavered. However, Ethan squeezed the trigger before she could respond. The bomb reverberated around the room, but nobody outside could hear it because of the soundproofing. The formidable and mysterious businesswoman Maggie Caldwell had passed away. Ethan was standing over Maggie's corpse. Slowly, the truth of what he had done began to set in. The immensity of what he had done made him panic, but he had learned how to hide his traces from years of dealing with the evil side of life. In order to give the impression that Maggie had committed suicide, he carefully prepared the room and cleaned the area, erasing any evidence of his presence. By placing the shotgun next to her body, he made it appear as though she had shot herself by wrapping her hands around it. In order to prevent fingerprints or DNA evidence from connecting him to the crime, he next thoroughly cleaned every surface he had come into contact with. Before sneaking out of the estate in the dark, he made one final check of the room to make sure everything was in working order. Ethan was well gone by the time the authorities showed there the following morning, reintegrating into society as if nothing had occurred. Inconsistencies surfaced as detectives looked into Maggie's death, which was initially determined to be a suicide. After returning from his most recent mission, Michael Caldwell was crushed to learn of his wife's passing. He never thought their marriage would end so tragically, even though it had been far from ideal. But as the investigation progressed, Michael started to have doubts that Maggie's death was as simple as it appeared. His questions grew as he discovered more about his wife's covert life. Although Michael had always recognized Maggie's complexity and dark side, he had never thought she was engaged in such risky relationships. Even though the case got more complicated, Michael grew more motivated to find the truth as the inquiry went on. The case swiftly gained widespread media attention, with headlines dominated by conjecture over Maggie's hidden life. As investigators learned more about her relationships with younger men, it appeared that one of them might have been motivated to murder her. However, in spite of their best efforts, the police failed to discover any solid proof that connected anyone to the crime. Ethan, who had meticulously removed any indication of his involvement, observed the investigation from a distance. He avoided suspicion by using the shadow navigating skills he had learned from his earlier experiences. He maintained a low profile by altering his appearance, avoiding interaction with anyone who would link him to Maggie, and staying out of sight by avoiding any locations where he might be recognized. The public's interest in the case declined as the months went by. In a world full with unsolved cases, Maggie Caldwell's death sank into obscurity as the media moved on to the next big story. Michael Caldwell was left with more questions than answers when the case was finally closed because the authorities, despite their best efforts, were unable to locate any credible leads. Haunted by his wife's passing and the unsolved mysteries surrounding her passing, Michael finally came to terms with the possibility that he might never find out. Those who knew Maggie Caldwell would always be puzzled by the case's official classification as unsolved. Ethan was unharmed and could carry on with his life as if nothing had occurred. He relocated to another city, changed his identity, and began anew. He had been hardened and taught the actual cost of his goals by the event. He used his athletic experience to draw in new customers as a fitness trainer at a posh gym. He avoided intimate connections and kept his background a secret, keeping to himself. He had become adept at negotiating the perilous seas of his own sinister tendencies, and he had come out on the other side more crafty and elusive than before. Even though the world changed, he could never forget Maggie Caldwell because she served as a warning about the perils of tinkering with power and desire. Ethan, however, had no remorse. The most crucial lesson he had ever learned was to never show your true self to someone until it was too late. A smile flashed on his lips as he strolled through the streets of his new existence.